Okay. Welcome everybody to Chat with Green Aggies. We are currently just getting everything together, sharing everything on Facebook, making sure everything's recorded. And so we still got about a minute before we're going to start with our program today. So just take some time to settle in and make sure that you can hear everything, get some coffee, and get ready to learn about abiotic stresses. Okay, so I see that you are recording.
Yes, I am recording. Yes, and I'm gonna go live.
All right.
Just give me a second. We will
No
be
problem.
live soon.
Okay, here comes Paul.
Chrissie, can you see this? Okay.
Yes, it says that it is now being recorded on Facebook. So let's make Paul I don't know if I can do that. Paul a co-host, maybe.
And we
No,
can
I
probably
can't.
ask Paul to monitor the chat for us.
Yes, so you can make him a co-host if you want to, so he can turn his video on.
Can you make Paul the co-host? Or
I can't. I think you have to do it because you're the host.
okay, where is Paul?
All right, there we go.
Paul, right now you're officially the co-host. Are you ready?
Okay. Yep, it was hard getting in.
That was not intentional, just so
Okay.
you know. Didn't mean to keep you out.
No problem. Just letting you know in case there's anything major going on.
Yes.
I'm not sure.
One major thing that's going on right now is that Chrissie and I are going to do a webinar on understanding and mitigating abiotic stress in landscapes.
So I'm not sure about you, Paul, but are you hearing a kind of an echo from Mung Mung?
A little bit.
Okay.
You're nice and clear.
Okay. Yeah. Mung Mung, you're kind of sounding echoey.
I'll stop talking.
That sounded better.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was, I don't know what it was, but anyway. Okay, so you want to get started or wait another? Okay. All right, so welcome everybody to Chat with Green Aggies. We, as you've noticed, we've kind of started a different time period of Chat with Green Aggies. We no longer meet every week. We are now meeting every other week, which falls on the first and third Thursday of every month. And so we will continue that through the end of the year. And so we've only got a few of our Chat with Green Aggie normal panelists with us today. We have Dr. Mung Mung Gu, who's our extension ornamental specialist. She's going to be presenting today with me. I'm Chrissie Segars. I'm the extension turfgrass specialist. And then we also have Paul Winski, who is going to update us at some point on the peacock population down in Harris County, right, Paul?
I don't know where that came from, but that was a good picture.
Yeah, I got that. So it's really weird. I was we'll have a little random comment. I was in Prague about before COVID, right before COVID in 2020, I guess. And I went through this park that had peacocks just roaming everywhere. And so the other day I saw on the news about, the war, the debate against the peacocks down in Harris County, and the impact they were having on the livelihood down there. So anyway, I thought that would be pretty funny to talk about, but anyway, let's get started. So today we are going to talk about a topic that a lot of us have been experiencing for our whole career in the industry, but lately we've been having some rather extreme weather events, and that fits with our topic today of understanding and mitigating certain abiotic stresses in the landscape. And so, you may have noticed that we've had a lot of rain this year. So water is an example of abiotic stresses. So we're just going to talk about a couple of abiotic stresses that we get asked about the most, and later on in the year, we will cover some of these topics in detail. So Mung, ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, so starting off, just what is an abiotic stress? So when we think about the types of stresses that can impact our plants, whatever they may be in the landscape, we think about both biotic stresses, which are living stresses, things like, you know, diseases, insects, those types of things. And then on the flip side, we have abiotic stresses, which are usually environmentally based, something that's non-living. So for example, water can be a stress, both lack of water and excess of water, right? And so drought, we experience a lot. Drought's going to be one of the ones we actually focus on today. You know, just a period without significant rainfall. I'm not sure we've really had time to experience a drought this year in Texas. We've gotten an excess of water this year, seems like anyway. And then of course flooding, which we're experiencing in many parts of the state right now, especially in the Dallas area. It's been raining for the last 3 days. You know, we have a lot of waterlogging, even submergence in certain areas. And so that can be from rainfall and of course excess irrigation. So moving on, you can go ahead and kind of highlight some of the next ones if you want to. Salinity, you know, salt issues. Certain parts of our states have an excess amount of salts in the soil. This can have a large impact on our growth and eventually potentially plant death as well. Traffic, where, you know, if you're in a situation where you're managing parks and recs areas, you know, sports fields, then we have a lot of issues with traffic and damage from direct foot, from, you know, vehicle traffic, anything that can tear or add pressure to our turf grass. And indirectly, of course, this is also going to be able to change our soil properties and limit growth in that way as well. So some of the other abiotic stresses, temperature, cold, heat. You know, cold can be kind of separated into two different things, chilling stress and then a freezing stress. So anytime a plant can be damaged by any temperature below the optimum. And so we will focus on low temperature stress today, since we did have a rather crazy winter where we experienced a lot of these stresses. And of course, heat stress, you know, it's really hot outside, rise in temperature can really cause a lot of damage to our plant as well. So one or the other extremes. And one of the most common things, I don't know about mung, but in the turf grass world, one of the most common things we get asked about is shade. And so light stress, you know, we can have an excess of light and we can have low light. And so what we're going to be talking about today is shade, of course, and that can be caused by trees, buildings, other types of structures, and it really can limit the growth of the plant. And then last but not least, combined stresses. So, you know, we're not really going to be talking in detail about the plant responses to these stresses, but when we talk about these stresses, each one, like a drought, a salinity, a cold, they're going to make a plant have a certain biochemical response. And so some type of physiological mechanism is going to say, hey, I'm under drought stress. I need to do this to save myself, okay? And so that kind of changes a little bit when we start talking about combined stresses. And so there's a lot of studies on combined stresses. And a lot of them initially would think, well, if I have a drought and a salinity stress combined, those plants are probably just going to do the same responses that they would do to the separate independent stress. But that's what we're finding is not necessarily true. And so the response can't directly be extrapolated from the independent response. So it's kind of a different mechanism of, well, how do we manage combined stresses versus, you know, just one? And so I pulled this off of the NOAA website. This is just kind of a combination of events over a period of about 15 years where they've spent billions of dollars on certain events, right? And so you can see that the combined stress of drought and heat during a certain heat wave is going to be upwards of $2 billion, where drought alone might have only cost about 50 billion. And so you can see how the combined stresses are really impacting the plants. Okay,
Well,
so go
Chrissie,
ahead. Yes.
these combined stresses, the dollar value, the cost, these are not the stress, the value, the cost by the stress on landscapes. And these
Right.
are more about human activity in general, right?
In general, yes, but they do take into account like certain industry if they have to come in and give them any type of subsidy, I'd say. And so, yes, it's not only the landscape plants, it's kind of a combination of just all the money that they spent. And if they spent money on saving certain industries, you know, that can be included in this. So, yes, that's a good point for sure.
Right, thank you. And I would just imagine like drought and the heat wave, you know, like the agriculture industry
Yes.
as a whole, and then, you know, drought, and then, you know, freeze and then flooding, you know, I would imagine flooding, not only the agriculture industry is impacted, but also just, you know, residential area,
Yep.
you know, lost
Structural type
houses,
stuff.
yeah, structural type of stuff. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
For sure. So the first one we are going to talk about is drought stress. You know, usually we are pretty confident each year that we're going to have some type of drought stress in some part of the state, maybe not the entire state, just depending on the climate and the weather changes, of course. But, you know, drought stress is going to be any time we have a significant or moderate loss of water. And so this can lead to different responses from the plant, of course, which we'll talk about on the next couple slides. But, you know, classic signs of drought stress are what we see in that top left corner, footprinting, wilting, turf maybe turning a blue, green, or gray type color, a straw colored turf is, of course, and then if you're talking about turf grass specifically, then we can see, you know, that thatch layer, underlying root zone showing some signs of hydrophobicity and just not water loving, not taking into that, not taking water into that root zone. And so, you know, I know we're talking about landscape in general, but, you know, one of the most common things that we see is a wilting or some type of leaf rolling, right, Mung Mung? Would you say that's the common sign in landscape plants?
Yes, I agree completely. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. And so we have a lot of things that plants respond to when we come to drought. So let's go on the next. Well, first we'll talk about, you know, some key terms. So we hear a lot of times, well, that plant's more drought tolerant, or that plant's able to drought avoid. That plant is drought resistant. And so what do those terms actually mean? And so drought avoidance is going to be a mechanism that the plant can go through to kind of limit certain processes such as transpiration or water loss through some of our leaves. And then they're going to do something about promoting that water uptake. This may be something like making sure their roots are still growing, their roots are searching for the water. And so they're going to avoid drought in a way that they can reduce the dehydration, close their stomata, make their leaves smaller, but make their roots longer so they can search for the water, right? Then there are plants that can do something called drought escape. They pretty much just speed up their life cycle and they accelerate and they flower and they seed set. So that might not be something that we see as often in turf grass, right? And that might be something we see more often in landscape. Is that true?
Not necessarily in landscapes.
Okay. Well, I guess like certain plants, right? Certain flowering annuals, certain plants, maybe.
Yes, I was just talking to a colleague of mine who visited a place, Alpine in West Texas. Alpine in West Texas, where, you know, it's semi-arid area, and she showed me a flower, and she has never seen that flower before, you know, so many times that she visited that area. But this year, not only that we are getting a lot of the rain in Texas or in the whole southeast of the United States, Alpine is also getting a lot of rain. So like you said, you know, it's a mechanism that allow the plant life cycle to be completed before drought reaches a critical level. So with all the rain, the plants just accelerated the flowering and seed set. And so that's what often we see in, not landscape, but, ecological landscapes of the arid and semi-arid area. So that's a very common, phenomenon in those areas.
Cool. So then last but not least is drought tolerance, which is just the overall ability of that plant to cope with the reduced water loss potential of the plant tissue. So what are plant responses to drought stress? So, we'll discuss osmotic adjustment a little more in detail, but when you hear us say in a presentation or other folks say in a presentation, hey, the drought or the plant can kind of change itself to keep the cell full and rigid and keep those plant tissues rigid, and they just kind of physiologically adjust themselves. Well, this is what we're talking about, osmotic adjustment, which we have a little diagram later that kind of explains it, and you can see it. It basically takes time for this to happen, right? Not every plant can adjust themselves the same way, so it's definitely a genetic type of deal. But basically it allows the plant not to wilt as fast, and it allows those cells to be turgid or rigid, basically. And so then, of course, a stomatal closure, that's going to limit water loss from the plant, can hold it in longer, kind of increase some of that leaf area to not lose as much water. Did you want to talk about that?
Sorry, I apologize.
Okay.
My hand.
It's okay. It's okay. I thought that maybe that was something to do with that you wanted to show, but no problem. We'll wait.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in like that accidentally.
No problem. And so then we also have what we were just talking about, that decreased root or shoot to root ratio. And so the leaf is going to basically reduce itself. It's going to be smaller, reduce the surface area for water loss purposes. But in the same time, we're going to move some of that energy down to the roots to make them go deeper and make them search for water. Okay. And so we increase that root growth. Another thing that the plant can do is increase the wax composition of their leaf, and also some of the hairs. And what that does is it basically reduces the transpiration, right? It reduces the water loss from that leaf, but in turn, increasing that wax can also increase reflection of light as well. And so, there's a lot of things that our plants can do, which is really cool. And then, of course, reducing photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the process where we're taking in light from the sun, we're producing energy for our plant to grow. And so if our plant says, hey, we're under drought stress, we probably don't really want to grow very much at this point. So we can kind of reduce some of those growth processes. Anything to add, Mung Mung?
Yeah, I want to make a very inappropriate analogy on the on the increased hair deposition on leaf surface and the effect of those leaf hair, on conserving water. The reason that the plants develop those leaf hair is a way to conserve water. So imagine that you see two people. One is bald and one is full of hair like Dr. Chrissie Segars. And
but not Paul. Paul might be getting this hair done soon.
I'm not saying Paul, just someone who's bald. I am.
Paul has short hair by choice.
Paul, I don't know why you just somehow decided to show your webcam. Please, leave it on. We would like to see you. I'm serious. We would like to see you.
Because I figured you needed another person for comparison, so I knew where this was going.
Dr. Chrissie Segars mentioned the reduction in photosynthesis because what photosynthesis does is these stomata, the second one, stomata closure. So for the photosynthesis is basically gas exchange through those little stomates, those little opening on the leaf surface, the CO2 gets in, oxygen gets out, and along with oxygen going out is water vapor. So just imagine there's a water bubbling, underneath the surface. The one with the hair the hair would kind of work as a barrier so that the water potential gradient wouldn't be that great. The greater the water gradient is, the faster water escape from those pores. So, and another analogy is, when a bald person with a very hairy person, they wet their hair, imagine which one would have their scalp dry faster, the one without a whole lot of hair. The one with a lot of hair, like Dr. Segars, well, as a lady, how long it takes to dry your hair, right? So yeah, so with a lot of hair, it definitely helps to conserve water. So Paul,
that was a great analogy. I'm going to start using that.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul, for leaving your webcam on. And thank you, Dr. Segars, for your encouragement. I used to use a very hairy man analogy, but I think maybe just using a bald versus, somebody with hair may be easier. So as you can see here, so these on the leaf surface, there are a lot of structures. So some of these structures are called trichomes, or just simply called, leaf hair. There are also wax, wax may build up on these leaf surface. So either the wax or the leaf hair, they are a mechanism for plants to conserve water. In addition, there are, Dr. Segars talked about photosynthesis, and photosynthesis in plants world, they have 3 different types. There are C4 CAMs and also C3s. Most of the plants are C3 plants, but there are, like the cactus, yuccas, a lot of those plants are C4 or CAM plants. If you think about the succulents, those are CAM plants. They do it in a way that they're very water efficient. They're very water efficient, often very heat tolerant. So those plants, they are inherently, genetically, just more water efficient, and they're more drought tolerance. I think I'll have a slide to explain upper and understory plants. And I think in landscapes, we really need to know our plant materials well for these things. So if you think about the plants, let's say oak trees, normally, generally speaking, they are upper story plants. They have been evolved and adapted to this environment that's been just under the full sun condition with a lot of wind. Upper canopy versus lower canopy. The upper canopy, the wind speed would be much more. It doesn't have a whole lot of obstacles to reduce the wind speed. So more wind, high wind speed, and more water vapor is taken away faster from these little openings. And then if you Dr. Segars also mentioned, smaller leaf areas, and then some plants simply adapted to smaller leaf areas to conserve water. And then there are some plants are just completely leafless, and we've seen plenty of those plants. And then when it comes to leaf morphology, the hairy ones versus smooth ones. So in the plant world, we call it the glabrous. The waxy ones versus the papery ones, the blue, gray, silver, those colors, versus the green colors. And then there's also a leaf thickness. Some leaves are thicker, so that it takes the water molecules within the leaf longer pathway to get out, and that would be one way to conserve water. So this is an example. The reason the Dusty Miller looks very dusty is not because they have dust on them. is actually because if you look very close, that they're so hairy, they're so hairy that it's the hair that's growing all over them. And what color is the hair? The color of the hair is white. And compare white compared to black, what would white do? White color reflects away some of the sunlight, the heat, right? So these are, the white color hair are kind of two aspects of how plants like Dusty Miller evolved to simply conserve water. One easy way to kill plants with this kind of characteristics is, Dr. Segars, do you know what is it? Simple way to kill this type of plants. Just water it too much.
That's what most people do to kill plants, right?
Yes, that is what most people do to kill a lot of plants in landscapes. So this is a comparison, an oak, an upper story. And of course, we don't see a whole lot of hosta, but hosta would be a lower story plants. And if you look at the leaf, the oaks is waxy versus hosta leaves is very papery. And then if you look at the, in hostas, there are green leaf hostas versus their variegated leaf hostas. So, the green leaf hostas, the solid green leaf hostas, they would have more photosynthetic area that will probably use this more water compared to the variegated hostas that, doesn't have as high as the photosynthetic capacity as the solid green leaf one. So the variegated one more likely will use less water. And in that sense, it's not necessarily more drought tolerant, but it just simply uses less water. So I think these are all the things that we need to consider when we place these things in landscapes. Osmotic adjustment.
All right, don't you want to talk about this?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what we were talking about earlier, when a plant basically physiologically responds to keep that turgor pressure or make sure this cell, can you see my, I guess you can't see my thing.
No, sorry.
But make sure the cell can basically stay rigid and not wilt, right? And so without getting too complicated, there's something called water potential, solute potential in a cell that basically regulates how water and different solutes can move into and out of the cell. There's something called like a semi-permeable membrane in the cell that allows things to go through, right? And so basically, when a plant is under drought stress, they kind of start increasing net solutes, right? And so when a plant is under drought stress, they will reduce their osmotic potential, which can also be called solute potential. And please feel free to Google this later. But it basically lowers the potential of the osmotic potential. And so it in turn allows more water to go through the membrane, in turn keeping the cell turgid or rigid and not allowing it to wilt as fast. And so, when we start talking about osmotic adjustment, drought tolerance, and all that kind of stuff, this is one of the big factors that can go into that. Plants are different, even between turf grasses, genetically they can be different, and they can respond to drought in many different ways. But this is one of the responses. This also happens with salinity stress as well, right? To keep different ions and toxic ions out. This can also be a product of that. Do you have anything?
So these, as we can see, so water potential is a very tricky thing. Mm-hmm. Pure water, water without any ions, without sugar, without nothing. That's zero. That's zero.
Yep.
That's the highest you can have. The highest you can have. Water potential is very negative.
Yes.
Anything you put in there, if you put water in there, salt there, that's negative. And it's actually easier to understand this, when water potential is negative, because where does water go? Water goes to where potential is lower. Right. So in this case, with the osmotic adjustment, and then you see these blue dots. Obviously this one with the osmotic potential, there are blue dots. There are more blue dots than this one without the osmotic adjustment. So these blue dots are the ions, or the it could be a protein, it could be amino acid. It could be amino acid. So or it could be sugar, alcohol. Depending on the plant species, these dots could be a combination of different things. Because of these, the osmotic potential means these things increase to lower the osmotic potential. Because the osmotic potential become lower, the water will come in to these places to keep the plants target. Versus, when there's no osmotic adjustment, the plants showing the wilting symptoms.
All right. So speaking of wilting, this is one of our visible signs. Any type of drooping, folding, rolling of turfgrass leaf, of a ornamental leaf, can be due to that result of the lack of turgidity that we just kind of saw with wilting to water loss. And we talked about earlier, leaves can turn colors, blue, gray, green. And then of course, if you walk on it and you press your foot down in it, those leaves tend to not bounce back as quick or have, that kind of spring back. So yeah, wilting is not always drought related, right? It can be other weather related incidences. It can be maintenance related. And so, but our first thought usually is when we see wilt is, oh no, we need to water more, right? And so, but also, under that maintenance related, we can see waterlogged soils or excess water can also lead to wilt, right? And along with a lot of other factors. So just keeping those best management practices, especially when we are managing things that are in soils that can be compacted and may be waterlogged or have higher salts. These are things to keep in mind as well.
So this is some example of not necessarily drought, but too much wind, as I mentioned before. When those water escape from the pores on the leaf surface, wind will accelerate, taking those water vapors away and decrease the water gradient above the layer, just a small layer of air above the leaf surface. And that way you could just, imagine water vapor escapes the leaf surface much faster. In a sense, it kind of caused a microclimate level drought, not necessarily the drought from the root zone, but simply because the water demand is much higher where the water escaped from plant body. So symptoms like this, it could be kind of called wind burn. It's not necessarily a burn like sunburn, too much heat. It's a burn. It's quote unquote burn from too much and too fast water loss. So for plants, for instance, very tender plants like Japanese maple, it may help to place them under certain windbreaks, under certain shelter space, next to big trees or a row of other plants. And like Dr. Segars says that, in this case, additional water may not necessarily solve the problem, and additional water may be even one of the issue. Because here, for instance, compacted soil or the lack of oxygen could also happen in waterlogging conditions. And when that happens, when that happens, it's about the capability of roots absorbing water is impacted, and that's affected. So what it shows in the plant body is that they don't have enough water.
Okay, like we said, wilting is not always drought stress. I love the poorly drawn lines. They're really funny. The illustrations are pretty funny. You can follow them on Instagram. Anyway, this is kind of how we feel sometimes, right? It's just kind of second nature to us to have. We want to be caregivers. We want to fix a problem. And so plants sometimes get the brunt of that. We say, oh no, our plant's wilting. It must need more water. So it's just kind of a little funny meme to remind ourselves that, we are not always the answer. Humans can sometimes be a pest as well, right? So.
Human beings may be the biggest pest, probably.
Biggest pest of all, right?
We may be the biggest pest, yes.
Yep.
Dr. Segars, okay. What do you think is going on here?
Well, this looks like some potential flooding areas, some areas of some excess water that was just kind of hanging around for a while. Is that right?
Probably so. This is
okay.
This is turf. This is yours.
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me.
I see. The thing is, I don't want to step on your turf. That's
oh, ha. So yeah, that's what it looks like to me. Just an area that had a lot of submerged turf for a while, and flooding can often cause erosion of even turf, soil, just overall canopy loss, deterioration, depending on how long that turf was in those kind of situations. Because as we were talking about earlier, the primary mechanism of water uptake is through the roots, right? And so we can see direct injury from submersion because of lack of oxygen, killing the roots, just not allowing them to function. And we can also see, depending on what type of water it is, where it came from, we might kind of see an impact on the soil. We might see salt that could potentially harm the turf. We can see increase of compaction, depending on if someone's using it while it's wet, right? And so we can see a lot of kind of indirect things as well from flooding. So
I think this is the drainage. So
yes.
Water
looks like it goes
here.
That way.
Yes, and goes this way. So this is definitely a low spot. And as you can see, this there's no standing water here, but the water, right here, it's definitely saturated. It's saturated with soil, with water, and that's probably not that great for for the turf grass. Right. And again, I don't want to step on your turf, really.
Well, especially just prolonged. This is one of the most common things we see. Water is often one of the driving forces of turf grass issues. So whether too much or too little, folks that might inherit an area, this looks kind of like an open park area outside of, I'm not really sure what that is over there. Is that like
here's the Houston Convention Center?
That's
George
what I
R.
was going to
say. That's what I was going to guess, but I didn't know. Well, good. I'm not that, I know things kind of. So anyway, depending on the area that you inherit, or depending on how that place was constructed, drainage and water movement is often a huge issue for turf managers. So
what correction would you do for this area?
Well, it depends, right? There's a lot of steps you can take depending on how much money you have and how much
Let's
time.
say you have unlimited budget.
If you had unlimited, it would be redoing this area and installing some kind of subsurface drainage, right, to move the water out. If you don't have that kind of time or money, then installing some quick fix drains to move that water out of there is another option. But often we see just places getting constructed with no subsurface drainage and maybe an improper soil layer that leads to more drainage issues. So that's something to really be cognizant of when you're inheriting something, just kind of figuring out how was it constructed and what am I working with and what kind of soil am I working with. Even if we got the best drainage under the ground as anyone, if we create a soil issue, then it's really not going to matter very much, right?
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so let's speed it up. I guess we've only covered one stress. So low temperature stress, this will be kind of quick. This is just some images that I've gathered from some site visits or what have you around Texas. And so thinking about just winter kill in general, non-specific term, describing some type of injury loss. This is specific to turf grass during the winter. So several factors can be at play here. Breaking it into that freezing, chilling stress earlier. So freezing stress can cause, ice crystals forming inside the crown. You go out there and walk on it or drive your car on it. Well, we just potentially ruptured our cells of our grasses and most likely did some severe damage there, right? Now, what about different cycles of warm and cold weather? We might experience that sometimes during the year where it's hot for a while, we get a quick frost, and it's hot again, we get a quick frost, and we kind of have a weird cycle that's disturbing our dormancy periods, which our grass is going to save themselves from the winter, right? Any stresses. And then of course, kind of like this year, it really depends on how long are we exposed to those temperatures. What's the surface temperature? What's the soil temperature? Those are going to be much more important than the air temperatures when it comes to turf grass, of course. So
I want to remind everyone that what's so funny?
I'm sure Dr. Bowling is going to love that screenshot of her on there.
Well, that's the punishment for she not attending today. I did a screenshot of the green industry winter storm recovery. Talking about the freeze that we just had. It was on February the 19th. Again, I just want to remind everyone, it's on the Texas Plant Clinic YouTube page. It's called Chat with Green Aggies. It's a Chat with Green Aggies playlist. So far, this year we have had 28 recorded webinars on this. And at the end of this webinar, this will also show on this playlist.
Yes. So just a recap of kind of what we experienced this year. And like Dr. Gu said earlier, when we look at these kind of costs, like Winter Storm Uri cost us $20.4 billion. That is not, of course, just in Texas. That's not, of course, just the plants, but that's the overall impact of that winter storm. And so this was actually the costliest winter storm since 1993. And so these are things that we are going to start having to prepare for on the landscape side, just, the impacts of weather extremes, right? And so you can go ahead. Similar to our drought response slides, here's some basic responses from low temperature stress: reduction in photosynthesis, reduction in respiration of our plants. Also, slowing the growth, right, can lead to earlier dormancy depending on when we experience those low temperatures. And then eventually, if it's severe enough and we get some actually freezing of the cell, prolonged period, then that can potentially lead to rupturing our cell wall and causing either irreparable damage or just a slow recovery. What about some maintenance stuff? I don't know if that's going to pop up or not. Maybe it's deleted. Okay. Oops. Well, sorry about that. I messed up my transitions, I guess. So poor water movement we talked about earlier, that can lead to excess winter injury, right? We don't want sitting water out. Excessive nitrogen fertilization during the year can lead to us having thin blades and shoots that aren't prepared. Go ahead, Mung Mung. Is there any more? keeping our fertilizer up, especially our potassium levels following our soil tests. Potassium has become kind of known as the stress nutrient, especially when we start talking about low temperature stress. It can help thicken those cell walls and basically just help the plant prepare more for low temperature stress. Of course, excess water is going to lead to shallow roots, and then low mowing can lead to a smaller amount of insulation basically at that surface to protect our crown, which is our vital portion of the turfgrass plant. Something that we hear a lot, that a lot of folks just still say, oh, it doesn't matter, whatever. When we have a frost, especially a heavy frost, we always try to recommend a reduction in foot traffic before, or at least until the frost is removed. So a lot of times we'll see, golf courses and sports field irrigate, right, in the morning to kind of get that frost off of there. And so driving or walking can definitely rupture or puncture our cells with those freezing crystals inside the cell. So. All right. Last but not least, light. And so the leaf is very important for light absorption, right? That's where our primary absorption is happening, upper and lower leaf surfaces. So we need green tissue for maximum light absorption. And of course, when it comes to turf grass, we're mowing, which is a stress, number one, right? And then we're removing green tissue. So think about a golf green where we're mowing down to 1/10 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch. We are asking a lot of that turf grass plant. I mean, barely seeing any photosynthetic tissue. And so if we have a green that may be surrounded by trees, we are severely limiting the amount of photosynthesis that could be happening with that plant. And so that's where plant selection comes in. We do have plants that are more tolerant to lower light conditions. Of course, in regards to turf grass, all turf grass wants light. Some can just tolerate less light. And so we need to have the ability to absorb that sunlight there. What's going on here? Okay, yeah. So this is just some more things that, can happen to the plant whenever they're exposed to shade, partial or complete shade. We can see some of these things happening here, but over here in the image, this is actually a example of some of those combination stresses that we were talking about earlier. So initially in September, we might have just had kind of a shade issue, right? And also our quantity and quality of light is reducing at this time of year, right? And so we've kind of put this St. Augustine directly under this tree where, hey, it really doesn't want to be directly under that tree anyway. And then we had the combination of low temperature stress to go along with that light stress. So we see in February, there's little to no green tissue out there, where kind of in the background we can see, an area of really green tissue. And then here we come through the winter storm in May, where we have a lot of just sporadic plant tissue. So this is where, hey, maybe this grass would have done a little bit better if we wouldn't have had the combination stress of the cold, but likely just with the light stress, we would have had a reduced canopy anyway. And so this is kind of showing just a combination of, hey, this is not a good site selection for this grass. And so this is
Dr.
one of the
Segars.
Yes.
Is this your front yard?
No. This is actually in my HOA though. And so yes, this is a product of poor plant selection, and then unfortunately poor timing of putting the sod down. Just didn't have time to do anything. So
Gosh, I hope your neighbor is not in the audience.
He might be. That's okay. This is HOA
Okay.
controlled, and I try to help them as much as possible. They never listen to me, so that's okay.
What would be your suggestion? Now it's August. It's August 2021. What would be your suggestion to move forward?
For shade?
for this area?
Oh, for this area. So I actually looked at it the other day, and there's limited amount of St. Augustine out there. And so I don't know why they decided to put the St. Augustine under there when the majority of our areas under those big oak trees have tall fescue under them. And so my suggestion would be for them to get rid of all the St. Augustine and just seed tall fescue this fall, since, you know, tall fescue can grow up in the Dallas area rather well, depending on the year. So,
thank you.
Yeah. This is just an overall general management and shade. You know, we've heard a lot of these things before, so it's nothing new, of course. Just a reminder of, if you are managing grass in a shaded area, you know, raising mowing heights will allow them to have more photosynthetic area for lights, more light capturing area. Of course, we want to limit the traffic, limit high nitrogen applications. If we can, you know, eliminate any low kind of overhanging branches, try to raise up that canopy a little bit if possible, just to allow more light in, getting rid of the debris from the leaves that are going to fall. And then, of course, irrigation management is very important here. It's kind of tricky, right, when we start talking about managing plants under a tree, because we have that competition there with the roots from the trees, but we also don't want to over irrigate that area, because that's going to increase the likelihood of some disease potential, because the foliage is going to stay wet for so long, it's not going to have as quick of a time to evaporate off the leaf. So it's kind of a interesting thing when we start talking about managing water under a tree. So
I want to show an example of a landscape plant. It's actually the same group of plants. This is if you be in this area, this is still in front of the Houston Convention Center. So, you know, this is one group of planting. On this side, you know, there is more sunlight level compared to this side, you know, so this side facing the outside, and this is the side facing the tree where they do get a lot of shade. And if you only look at this side, you don't see a whole lot of, you know, you don't see, you know, nothing's wrong. But compared to this slightly sunny side, you'll see that the flowers are not as many as the outside, you know, the inside being under more shady condition. And that's a lot of plants may have, you know, what may happen to a lot of plants that like sun, you know, they just simply not, the inside shady side simply just not performing as well as the outside with more sun. And this is another example of the roses. Really, there's nothing wrong with these roses. They're just not getting enough sun for photosynthesis to bring the best of themselves. Too much sun may not be for a problem for turf grass, but the too much sun often we happen, you know, to many landscape plants, and these sun scorch are what we or leaf marginal burn are what we often see in landscape plants when there's too much sun. And especially when it comes to variegated plants, like I mentioned before, they simply don't have, as compared to their solid green relatives, they simply don't have enough photosynthetic units to utilize the sun. They can't dissipate the heat from the sun. They may show this sunburn more easily than their solid green relatives. By the way, this is a firebush. This is a lime scissor firebush. Generally, they will have a chartreuse color or you know, so certain golden color, but this is overburned a little bit.
Mm-hmm. You know, that, you know, sunburn or whatever can actually occur in turf, depending on the species, of course, and then kind of the environment around it as well. So we can see that happen in turf. All right. So I saw this on Twitter. It was just posted yesterday by Dr. Jim Kearns. He is the turfgrass pathologist at NC State. And so he was working on some leaf spots on some of their Bermuda grass trials. And so this is an interesting one because he says it as well, evidence of predisposition to disease, basically, biotic diseases. And so we can see an abiotic stress here. Well, in the I forget my cursor won't work, in the non-fertilized area. And then we talk about ways to manage abiotic stresses, and fertility can be a way to manage those stresses. And so fertilized area was not predisposed to the biotic disease. And the non-fertilized area was affected by the leaf spot, and both areas were not treated with any fungicide recently. And so just using, some best management practices to promote turfgrass canopy health in times that diseases may be pathogens we know that are out there, maybe starting to come out, then that can help stop that biotic disease from actually occurring. So you have some stuff on that too, right?
Yeah, of course. I always want to talk about Crepe Myrtle bark scale, but I can't. Let me start with this slide. So this is one twig, but I simply broke it to show you both the upper side exposed to the sun, and the underside that's not exposed to the sun. So that's the shady side, the sunny side and the shady side. So Chrissie and Paul, which side do you see more scale, the sunny side or the shady side?
Shady.
Of course, the shady side. So I guess my preliminary hypothesis is that, hey, they like shade. They're, it's probably pretty, I think they have budget cuts too. They probably don't have the money to buy sunscreen and stuff. So they figure out, well, let's just stay on the shady side. So that could be their story. But then you guys probably know a lot about crepe myrtles. Crepe myrtles is a full sun plant. It does well under full sun conditions. So, around this dorm, this is the south side of the dorm, and this is the north side of the dorm. Some landscaper decided to, well, let's be symmetric, because it looks probably very nice on paper. This is the dorm, and then on both sides, we're going to plant crepe myrtles. Well, they do very well on the sunny side, and probably not that well under the shady side. So what we have seen, you're talking about the predisposition to biotic stress. And what we see in here is that the plants on the sunny side, the south side, not too stressed, the plants are not too stressed by too much shade. So they have a lot less of scale compared to the ones on the north side. This is another example of the right plants for the right place. This is a experiment that we did. We put the water sensitive sticky card under the both sunny side and the shady side of the canopy. Same plant. And we saw that at 30 minutes after exposure or 90 minutes, we simply put these sticky cards under the canopy, and we saw more water droplets from in the shade side. And these water droplets are caused by the honeydew secreted from the scale. And you can see that, more on the shady side.
Interesting.
Interesting, huh? I think that's interesting too.
Yeah. All right, we made it. So like we said, we are moving to an every other week format. Starting in September, we are going to have a fun update on the spring trials from so Paul can talk more about it, but Paul and Laura went to the California spring trials You want to give us like a brief little summary of what that is and what happens there, Paul?
Yeah, I think on the second, we're going to have Dr. Pemberton give his perspective, and basically that's a rollout of new genetics from the seed companies. So I think he's going to give his perspective, but I think he's also going to give an update on what he's seeing in his trials over there in Overton, which will be interesting to see. From what we've seen in California, are those plants doing as well for him in his area?
Great. So we'll look forward to hearing from Dr. Pemberton, and then on the third Thursday, the 16th in September, Dr. Bowling and I are going to talk about some things to start preparing for in regards to turfgrass programs and fungicides and weeds and those types of things to start thinking about for fall turfgrass management. And then in October, on October 6th, we're actually having our Turfgrass and Landscape Field Day. And on the day after, we will be covering some select talks from that field day and kind of giving an update on turfgrass research. And then later in October, we'll talk about some fall favorites, which is really kind of fun, our favorite landscape sites, tips for some management of those areas. And then we'll continue into November and December with some timely topics on some disease prevention, preparing for winter, and then an overall year-end review in December. And notice we will only be doing one Chat with Green Aggies webinar for December. So we will just do that on the first Thursday in December.
Yeah, so make sure that you register for both webinars for the first Thursday and all the webinars for the third Thursday, so that you don't miss any of our talks. And just like I said, Chat with Green Aggie playlist is available on the Texas Plant Clinic YouTube channel. Yeah, check out all those videos in case you missed any or review some of those things. For instance, what is the osmotic potential that Dr. Segars just talked about? I still don't even know. No. And as always, we very much value your feedback. So the first question is asking you to select the webinar that you participated. So there is one for today, and we really appreciate your input on this. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, we finished like 1 minute late. We pretty much finished directly on time, which is
okay.
Great.
Do we have any questions?
I don't think so. Anybody have any questions from the audience? I don't see anything in the chat.
Nope.
All right. Well.
Okay. All right.
Great.
Without any questions, you'll have a great afternoon.
Yes, we look forward to seeing you in September.
Yes. All right.
Great.
Bye.
Goodbye.